You're quoting the last fucking, not the last, but the second last life coach takedown that I had to do, because this fucking guy was saying that we're getting our kids all addicted to drugs and blah, 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 and I had to cite pretty much everything that you just said, including the paradoxical reaction.
That was that fucking Nimrod who also was misogynistic and to a nurse as well.
Guy.
And fat shaming.
Oh, that guy. Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, that fucking guy, right? You pretty much recited everything that I said to him, including the paradoxical reaction, including the fact that if people take it properly like they're supposed to, then the risk of addiction is next to nothing. And if he sat down with 1,000 people with ADHD, I guarantee you he would come back with at minimum 90% average of people that forget to fucking take the things. Why do you think I have so many alarms on my phone to remind me to take the fucking things?
Because you're an addict, obviously.
Oh yeah, I'm a fucking strung out junkie, aren't I? Fuck off.
And that's the guy he also said that it actually damages your brain and makes you completely dependent on taking that med as well. And I pulled out the study that says that it was a long-term study as well that showed that people who used the medicine the way they were supposed to actually had an uptick in their brain chemistry and their ability to deal without the meds than normal people or people who abused it.
So, Jamie, those that take medication for their disorder are more likely to abuse their meds. Is this myth confirmed or is it busted?
This one's busted.
Busted. Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome.
I have ADHD and I just lost a hat for a second. Thought y'all might like to know.
Welcome to the server.
Moving on. So the next myth that we're going to tackle is that ADHD was created by the drug companies to keep children and adults on drugs.
Jesus fucking Christ. How many of my call-out videos are you going to fucking reference today?
Right?
Spoiler alert. The first actual modern day medicine reference to something that was ADHD happened in the 17 fucking hundreds.
Well, Big Pharma has a far reach, let me tell you.
And a time machine, apparently.
Time travel.
Let's think about this here real quick. Okay, I want to reference Big Pharma because this has been a thing. Big Pharma and the opiate crisis, right? And the accessibility of opiate drugs to assist with pain and everything like that. Now, let's talk about the accessibility of ADHD drugs and how we can only get 1 month's worth of pills every fucking month, and we have to talk to our doctor every month to get more. You have to sign for it and say that you're not going to abuse it or sell it or give it to anybody else. This does not sound like something for easy access that Big Pharma would want to push.
No, they would want it to be open for everybody to use.
Absolutely.
Because they want everybody hooked on it. That's why they created ADHD in the first place.
Well, you didn't know that? I mean, I thought that was the name of the episode. Big Pharma and the drug conspiracy.
We've talked about
starring
this
Lee.
We've talked about this before. Why the fuck would you create a medical disability where people forget to take their fucking drugs and try to hook them on drugs? That sounds like dumbassery.
It's just very counterproductive.
Nobody said that Big Pharma was smart.
So the big thing to remember is that ADHD dates as far back as the 1700s, and it has remained consistent throughout history as a part of mental health. While the name has changed, mainly due to our understanding of the disorder and advances in science, the disorder itself predates the current medical system used in almost every country. So no, unless Big Pharma has a fucking time machine to take us back to the 1700s where they first started hooking people on Adderall, then this is...
Jamie, this myth is...
This one is busted.
Thank you, Jamie.
You're very welcome. And now, a word from our sponsor.
Have you or a loved one been recently attacked by TikToks? If so, you may be eligible for compensation. I'm Jen Meets with I Am ADHD Incorporated, and I'm ready to fight for you. Complaints of feeling seen, called out, or put in a particular mood have been rolling into our office at alarming rates, and we are ready to get to work. Additional concerns may include a light bulb going off, realizing that a particular trait resonates with you, which in turn demands additional research to be done, causing hyperfocus to engage. Phew! Our offices are standing by to get your claim started. Simply call 1-800-I-KNEW-IT for more information and a free case review today.
Accommodations for ADHD create an unfair advantage.
Disagree.
living in a neurotypical world that does not support neurodivergent people is a massive disadvantage.
I refer to it more as leveling the playing field against those who don't struggle with things like working memory, with executive dysfunction, with pieces of paper that I can't read.
This right here is my letter of accommodations for college.
Ah.
The list of things that I get to do because I have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to run through this real quick and explain why each of these
Before you
are
do
not.
that.
Yes, of course, please.
As one who has been diagnosed for 20 years, I have never known about accommodations until recently, because that's how poorly I had the disorder explained to me. I didn't know anything about it. I knew nothing in the fashion of how to handle it, how to exist in normal everyday life. I knew absolutely nothing about having any kind of accommodations for work, for school, for any of that. And had I known any of these things even 10 years ago when I went back to college, I'm pretty sure the game would be a little bit different for me.
So I've gotten 1 degree without knowing that I had ADHD, and that was my nursing degree. And then I went through and I got a degree where half of the degree I did not have accommodations. The other half of the degree I did have accommodations.
Which half was easier?
Neither of them were easy. And that's the thing about accommodations. They don't exist to make a course easier.
I think that was my point.
I know that was your point. I was just, neither of them were easy because it's learning a whole new subject. Even though the shit interests the hell out of me, it was still a lot of fucking work. Now, I did the end of my college through online university, thanks coronavirus. But, so my letter for accommodation that I have in front of me is actually for the amount of time that I spent while I was online. I was allowed to split any timed quiz or test that was more than 1 hour in length into 2 separate sessions. The reason for this? Because I distract easily. This means that it is harder for me to focus on the things that I need to focus on, and the less focus that I have, the more likely I am to forget the information that I am supposed to remember. By splitting up those tests into 2 different sessions, it allows me to recenter and refocus before I go in to do the next test. So the way I did it is I took 1 half of the test one day, and I took the next half of the test the other day. I had a waiver for documentation requirements and the 50% rule for consideration of course extensions. So basically, if I ended up coming into an issue where I was behind and not going to have all of my work in by the end of class when grades were due, I was allowed to request an extension for that, because by its very nature, this can be one of those things that's slightly more difficult to stay on task. My course program was a lot of paper writing. So I typically, you have to have at least half of your classwork done. This is also there because I also have bipolar disorder and I also have PTSD. So if I'm having issues with those particular mental illnesses, it also covers over there, such as if I had to be hospitalized for a manic episode, it would cover me there. So that's a little less ADHD, but
still, these are things that are important to have documented for you.
And that's the big thing about accommodations for anybody who's looking at getting accommodations for college. If you don't know if you're going to need it, list it anyway. The worst the college can do is tell you no. At best, that accommodation is going to be there when you need it. And hopefully the middle ground that you find is that the accommodation is there and you don't need it, so you don't have to use it. It's there just in case. I've never had to have a course extension, but I had it there just in case something happened.
I've always been a big proponent of have it and not need it is better than need it and not have it.
Absolutely.
Very much so. People with ADHD have a tendency to work better under pressure, and for a lot of us, this is true. You don't want to know how many fucking papers I got in at 11:59 when the thing closes at midnight. It's ridiculous. Even though people with ADHD have a tendency to work better under pressure, that is not the case for every person who has ADHD. So when we have problems with focusing, when we have problems with being able to do the thing because of our executive dysfunction, it's important that we also have a little bit of a buffer there. So if we need it, we can take it. This is something I'm going to come back to here in just a second. The last one that I'm going to cover is my course materials. While I was an undergraduate student, I received hard copies of all of my materials rather than electronic. My school used online books and articles and stuff like that. And as a person with ADHD, I had a very hard time if I had to close out of something and then come back to it, finding where I was at, being able to focus on what I was doing, because that would eat up so much fucking time. And I'm also a very tactile learner, so I like to highlight, I like the feel of pages and being able to mark things with like tab notes and little tabbies in the pages and stuff. So my school was required not only to provide me with books in lieu of the electronic form of the book, but they were also required to provide me with all of the articles printed out as well. Anything that I had to do that was reading would get printed out, and the disability services at the college would contact me about 2 weeks prior to me starting a new set of classes and ask if it was okay if they printed this stuff out to mail it to me and then let me know that it was in the mail. This can be a big game changer. And if you're in like a physical course, you can also request things like a note taker to take notes, because we have a very hard time focusing on a lecture. And a lot of us also suffer with auditory processing issues. And because of that, we may not understand what's being said. So you can request a note taker. And in some cases, if they don't provide a note taker, they will be able to provide you with recording equipment so you can record the lecture yourself.
So the other option that I got from my school was if they couldn't provide a note taker for me, the teacher had to provide me notes on the lecture.
And again, with all of these things, like any of them would have been so beneficial had I known that they were there and available for me. Now, admittedly, your guys's are different than the ones that I would have to deal with, but from what I've seen, they're similar.
Yeah.
So this myth being that accommodations create an unfair playing field, essentially. I want to go back to talk about the extensions for assignments real quick, because this is a very, very, very narrow line to walk. And this is also something that I don't think gets talked about enough. And that is when accommodations are overreaching and they do create an unfair playing field for those that are neurotypical. And typically this is not at the administration level. This is done teacher by teacher, where you miss a deadline and you pull out your paper and say, okay, I have 5 extra days to get this in according to my disability. And the teacher says, okay. But what happens when that deadline comes and goes? And the teacher grants you another 5 days to get that assignment done. And what if that comes and goes and the teacher grants you another 3 days to get the assignment done? They've gone above and beyond what they're supposed to. And that does create an unfair playing field, unless it's something that they're doing for every student that's present in their class.
So I've seen an opposite reaction to that, where one of my teachers said, oh, you have an extension for 5 days? Fine. Everybody in the class gets that extension for 5 days. I don't feel like that's an accommodation anymore. We're just giving everybody that same treatment.
No, that's negating the accommodation at that point.
Absolutely. And it's either way, doing it either above or negating that accommodation is problematic.
So accommodations in and of themselves are there to provide a level playing field, so that somebody who has ADHD is playing with the same set of cards as a person who is neurotypical and doesn't suffer with a disability.
Let me say this. I know we're talking specifically about ADHD because we're focused on ADHD, but there are accommodations for neurodivergencies and disabilities, not just ADHD. You have to do your research and you have to go into your disability services to do this. And again, these aren't just limited to schools. These can be jobs as well. There are lots of protections in the ADA. I don't know what the Canadian version of the ADA is. But
for those of you in the United States, it's the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And I don't know what the Canadian version of the ADA is, but it's there. There's one in England as well that provide you accommodations at your workplace as well.
See, a lot of these up here in Canada, it is regulated by province, not so much at the federal level, but more at the provincial level.
And that's important to note too, is that each state in the United States also does protect disabilities outside of the federal protection. So also take a look at what state you live in and what is considered disability under protection through that state.
There is a federal statute in Canada, the Canadians with Disabilities Act, or the CDA.
Yeah.
That was done federally, on the federal level. But again, like you said, a lot of it breaks down into provinces as well. So I think we have proven that this is actually busted as well. Because no.
There's Jamie.
It mostly, I don't have a plausible sign.
It is mostly busted.
Okay, our next one is that ADHD affects only boys.
Well, Lee,
What
what
are you
do you
doing
have
here,
to say
then?
about that?
Fuck off.
All right, cool.
My very presence here proves that is not the case.
Well,